Hello everyone, welcome to the pilot episode for what we're calling Damiani's Story Time or Story Time with Damiani. I'm not exactly sure what the title is going to be. But basically, this isn't a show about game myths, this isn't about like game reviews, it's actually more of personal history with me and how I grew up and my experiences with video games. And for the very first episode, I thought, let's just go back to the beginning. Let's start with the story of how I first got exposed to video games, or more specifically, how I first encountered Nintendo, or the Nintendo Entertainment System. I was too young when the NES was originally released. I was technically born before it came out in North America, but I was too little upon its release date to probably have appreciated it. So my first exposure to Nintendo didn't come until a few years later, towards the end of the 80s, like right, I think in 89, I believe. 89, 90, like right around that time. I was going over to a friend of mine's house to play. I could have only been in like first grade, I think it was. Pretty sure it was first grade, and it was my friend Justin, and he lived pretty close by me. And when we used to play, we used to like go outside. So I grew up in a suburb area of Dallas, Texas, and at the time, it was not as suburban as it was back then. It was a little bit more rural. It had a golf course behind it. This like this country club that had a golf course and these big sprawling woods. And we'd go back out on them and play. We'd play on the hills of the golf course. We'd go out into the forest and play outdoor type stuff because we hadn't been exposed to video games, and technically the commercial internet, as you know, it didn't technically exist yet, so there wasn't anything else to do other than maybe watch TV and go outside. So anyway, one day I came over expecting, we're gonna go outside, we're gonna go like on our adventures and stuff with some of our other friends, and he brings me into his living room, and they had this giant Jetson style television, as in it had this curved like kind of like cloth thing that hung it from the wall, and it was like this curved projector looking screen thing. It just looked like it was something out of the Jetsons cartoon that I had seen. And he brings me over there, and there's this weird program on the screen. It looks like really like weird. It doesn't look like real people. It looks like almost cartoony, but it looks really bad for a cartoon. And he brings me over there, and he goes, "Hey, do you want to play this game with me?" And I'm like, "All right, well, what game?" He goes, "Well, you sit down on the couch, you look at the screen, and we use this controller to play the game." And I'm like, "But it's on the screen." So he hands me this. He hands me this controller and says, "Yeah, you see on the screen, there's something on there, and you control it by pressing the buttons. Like you move them with this, and then you jump with this." And I'm like, wait a second. So it's just like I thought it was like a TV show or something where you didn't like, interactive TV. So I'm like, I kept confusing it with a normal remote control. I'm like, I thought it was just something to do with television. I didn't get it. It was a video game machine. I thought it was just television programming. And he was just showing me a weird remote control for his TV, for his Jetsons television. I'm like, are you crazy or something? Like, what are you talking about? Like, so he sits me down. He then takes the controller in his hand and he starts playing it for me. And he shows the character on the screen starts moving around. I'm like, oh, okay, so this is pretty simple. You just move around, you jump, and then apparently you found out one of the buttons on here made you run. And I was just like, what is this? And he goes, oh, it's this thing called a video game. It's for Nintendo. And the game we were playing, as you probably could have guessed, was Super Mario Brothers. Although not this exact version, it was the one with the Duck Hunt Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt that came with most every Nintendo Entertainment System that was released back then. At least I think it was, but I mean, his had it, mine had it. It had like the slash on here, it had like the Duck Hunt. Unfortunately, this is the one I bought for recording Pop Fiction when we did the Lost Levels episode. So I still have I always wanted a cartridge that had just Mario Brothers on it and not Duck Hunt or something else. So we sit down and we start playing it, and I immediately go home afterwards and I tell my parents about this. I'm like, Mom, Dad, like there's this television game thing that you play with the remote controller, and you move this guy around, you jump around and stuff, and I had just never seen anything like it. And it's still hard to get in that frame of mind just because I can't remember it perfectly anymore because of how long ago it was, but memories of like confusion and bewilderment are what come up first when I think about it. Confusion is that I didn't exactly know what was going on at first until I had time to process it, like whatever. Once we sat down, once I had it in hand, I started playing it, it finally clicked and I finally got what was going on. And then just that there was something like this. And I bring this up because we played outdoors a lot. I played sports growing up, and especially at that point, like I remember I played like basketball and I played soccer. Like I think my dad's friend was like, one of my friend's dads was the coach of the soccer team, and I think I played t-ball. But my family had a lot more background in like sports and athletics, and it makes me wonder about going over to my friend's house that day and seeing an NES, and then going home and telling my parents about it, and then begging them for one, and finally getting one that had I never. I mean, Nintendo was pretty widespread as a kid. I doubt I would have been able to avoid it, but of all my friends that had it, he was the only one that had it at first. A lot of us didn't get it till later on. If he didn't have it at first, and maybe our circle of friends didn't really get into video games, I wonder if things would have turned out differently. Kind of an interesting thought. So yeah, that is how I first experienced Nintendo back then in the late 80s. And then shortly after, my parents got me an NES for myself, and I will save that for another time, because while it did come with Mario Brothers, I did get a different game, a second game that come along with it, a game that frustrated me and almost made me not want to play video games anymore. I do have trouble remembering if I got it pretty soon after or if I got it for Christmas, because I know it was in the fall of '89 that this all went down, and they got it from Toys R Us. I remember that much. I went to Toys R Us, they got it, and I think they got it pretty shortly after, because they started hearing some of my friends were starting to get ones, and like, oh, well, he needs to have one if everyone else is getting one, and it's this craze they see on TV, like it's this big thing. Nintendo's everywhere. Yeah, lots of stuff to share about that. But yeah, that's how I first got exposed to a video game. It was the original NES. It wasn't Super Mario Brothers, wasn't Zelda, it was Super Mario Brothers, and I thought it was some kind of TV program thing. I didn't really get it. In fact, when the Wii came out back in 2006, I remember doing something where Reggie was around for some event, and I told him the story about how they were explaining the Wii remote kind of looks like a TV controller, so it's more familiar to the mainstream audience. And I told him, ironically, when I first got exposed to Nintendo, I thought it was a TV controller as well, so kind of like went hand in hand a little bit. So at the end of these, I would like to do Q&A for questions mostly related to anything you think I could answer for you, not necessarily about just easy allies. So go ahead in the comments below for both the YouTube video, and if you're watching this on Patreon, go ahead and post your questions below. I'll do a Q&A segment at the end of these. These are going to be kind of short. Some of the stories might be a little bit longer. We'll see. And also, you could just you can tweet at me on Twitter. It's at MB Damiani is my Twitter handle. And yeah, I'll gather some of the questions. If there's just too many, I probably won't answer them all, because I don't want these videos to go for too terribly long, because we're gonna try and shoot for having either once a week or once every other week. We'll do these, and yeah, a lot of stuff to share with you, and hopefully it will reveal a little bit more about where I come from in terms of video games. You probably also see a little bit why I have more of a predisposition towards Nintendo stuff, because that's kind of what I grew up with. Although, well, the story about who in the family of mine was the Sega person, so it should be interesting. But yeah, let me know what you thought about this. If you want to change anything, I am so sorry I couldn't bring my original NES, and rather than give its own episode, during that same episode of the Lost Levels, for Pop Fiction, I actually destroyed my NES, well, irreparably damaged it, trying to disable the 10NES chip to bypass the security check, so that we could try and do this cartridge swap trick with Tennis and Mario. And because the NES no longer worked, when I moved, I got rid of the thing instead of trying to repair it. So I'm actually NES-less at the current point, and I no longer have my original NES. Still have some of my other original systems, which you might see later, but unfortunately I didn't have my NES to show off for you today because I unfortunately no longer have it. So again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.